So the militarymissions.org website is a joint initiative between the Conflict and Environment Observatory, Lancaster University and Durham University. We're calling out on the world's states and governments to report their military emissions, and hopefully by COP27 have these being reported by all the world's governments.
The military is a very carbon intensive and yet we know very little about how much they actually emit. And one of the sort of key issues is one of transparency, that they don't provide data to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change properly.
The biggest single problem is there's no one-stop shop for finding information on military emissions. If you do research in this area, the sources of data are very fragmented.
We've looked at the top 60 military spenders, looked at what they're reporting. Some of them don't report anything at all, but by doing this and bringing this sort of data into the open, we hope that policymakers, the public, and even militaries themselves can look at their colleagues, look at other countries and see how they're doing, and hopefully this will start to bring more pressure and attention on this issue.
We need to understand what the military's contribution to greenhouse gases is, and at the moment we can't do that. We can't make an estimate on a country level. We can't really make an estimate at all at a global level because the data is just not there to support those estimates.
Unfortunately, there's not a clear and precise framework that make it easy enough for governments to report their emissions.
Partly this is a historical thing going back to the Kyoto Protocol, where the US insisted on military emissions being exempted. The Paris Agreement in 2015 kind of made reporting voluntary, but there's no real pressure on militaries to actually report because this stuff's not being talked about, and this just seems a ridiculous situation to be in, that there shouldn't be sectors exempt from reporting and reducing their emissions. We're in a global climate emergency. Every sector has to do its part, including the military.
What do we want? Climate justice! When do we want it? No!
I do research on United States military greenhouse gas emissions and the military industrial emissions of US military industry. The United States military in 2020 emitted 51 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. That's larger than the emissions of many countries. You could compare them to Portugal's emissions, or Denmark, or Sweden's emissions.
So there's been a fair amount of work done on the US military, the US Department of Defense, quite a lot of attention on them, and they have quite a lot of data to look at, but of course it's a much wider problem.
There's China, India, South Korea, big spenders, Saudi Arabia for example, and they're not really reporting anything meaningful.
This is important because the military have such a large supply chain.
For example, if you think about a jet fighter, it's not just Lockheed Martin that is producing that jet fighter, but it's all the contractors and subcontractors that are part and parcel of that jet fighter scheme. When you think about the controls within a jet fighter, all of those component parts are usually subcontracted out to different companies, and those are all part of the supply chain that make up that particular system.
So we need to start seeing militaries asking of their suppliers what their carbon emissions are associated with all the equipment that they purchase and all the other procurements.
We are advocating that they should be a key part of discussions so that nations can feel the need to put in steps to cut down emissions from military operations.
And what we need is one or two states to be leaders in this, to take up the mantle, to have open, transparent reporting of all emissions and to set a precedent for other states to follow.
We're calling on the world's governments to uphold their obligations, report their military's emissions, so we could start working towards ways in which to reduce their carbon emissions.